Please pray with me. Gracious God, may the meditations of my mouth and the meditations of all our hearts be a pleasing offering to you, O God, our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. What a blessing it is to be able to share Christmas morning service with my church family, my spiritual family. I was reading online about Christmas on Sunday, and a lot of the ministers are like, well, we're not going to hold the service. Or some were like, well, we'll hold the service because actually this is one of the few times you'll actually get anybody to come to church on Christmas morning. But it can be a little bit of an effort, right? There are plenty of other places that we could be. Well, not so much me, but normal people with normal social lives. But we've chosen to be here together, praising God and celebrating all that God has done for us. These 9 lessons and carols give us a glimpse of what theologians call the Heilgeschichte. And like so many theology terms, it's German. In English, we usually call it salvation history, but that's not an actual translation of the German. Salvation history, Heilgeschichte, is the story of God's working through human history. It's through the acts of creation, and when human beings fail to live up to God's rules for how to live together, then God works out another strategy. And this goes on quite a bit throughout the whole Bible. Back and forth between humans who are falling down on the job and God working out yet another solution to fix the problem that humans have created. We have Moses who brings the 10 Commandments and the Torah. We have the prophets who bring their various messages keyed to the particular times and places, threatening punishment if justice and righteousness are not satisfied, but promising a future salvation to those who are lost and discouraged. And finally, we have the arrival of Jesus of Nazareth, the one whom we call the Christ, the Messiah, which means the Anointed One. God's acts in human history, in our individual lives, are like mile markers along a highway. Now, as a kid, I always liked to count up or count down the mile markers, depending on which direction you're going. But I've discovered that's very hard to do in Iowa, since so many of the roadways are signed for multiple highway numbers. So it's a little hard to figure out the patterns, because like if you're coming up the diagonal, you've got a set of numbers, but then as soon as US 65 heads up, the numbering system starts over, and now you're on a different set of numbers. So that kind of throws things off. But as a kid, I was used to like to watch those mile markers go. Because, you know, these markers show that you're moving. They show that you're getting from point A to point B. They're a very real reminder that things aren't just standing still. Because when you're driving on the freeway in eastern Montana, it can seem like you are standing still. Because the ground is so very flat with no trees, no landmarks, you're just going and you can't even tell you are moving. But the mile markers keep going up or going down that lets you know that you are moving. More than many other things, we humans need to know we're on the way to somewhere. The mile markers of God's grace show us that we are moving from a state of death and sin to a state of life and righteousness. And if you are old enough, let us remember some of those events. If you're old enough, you may actually remember your baptism. If you weren't old enough, then hopefully remember the stories your parents and godparents told you about your baptism. Especially if there was something embarrassing, I'm sure they told you about it then. Well, you spit up on the master. And then, of course, you have Sunday school that you remember. You have confirmation. And then you have that time as an adult when you really claimed the faith as your own. You have those times when difficult moments happened and you didn't know if you could even go on. And yet you made it. With God's help, you got through it. And that pattern continues on for us, doesn't it? Where we, time and time again, challenging times come upon us, and we think, God, I can't make it. I can't make it. And yet that grace is there, and you make it through what you thought you couldn't. So much so that sometimes when you turn around and look at the path you came, it's like you're hiking along a mountain and you went along one of those little trails that goats go on. And you think, how did I even make it across that trail without plummeting to my death? But those mile markers in our life, they show us that we are moving, that God is at work in our lives, and that we are getting closer and closer to that ultimate goal, that life of truth and justice and righteousness, that movement from death to life, that movement from sin to righteousness. And all of this movement, all of these mile markers are made available by God's amazing grace and love, revealed to us in the person